Morning, sir.
Good.
Good afternoon, actually. Sorry.
Yes, it is afternoon. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Oh, I see we have a guest. Is that I can't tell, Courtney, is that your son or daughter?
Daughter.
Daughter, she is adorable. Ah,
Thank
she's going to join us for an excursion through the lottery today. Maybe
you. For a little bit.
a little bit. Good. All right. We'll wait just a couple minutes as we wait, let other people join us. And then we will go exploring the lottery. And just a reminder, your exam is next week, right? So if you have questions about the exam, I plan on reviewing what's expected in the second half after our break. So, try to save your questions till then. And we'll go through the lottery and try to finish up a bit early so that we can discuss the exam and review certain things that are expected on the exam and so on. And we can look over that essay essentials document I sent you again, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page for that.
Sir, can I ask just just one quick question?
Sure.
Do you mind? Is it for the exam? Are we gonna able to choose one article, or are you gonna give us option, or is it just one article that we really have to focus on?
I don't know yet. Yeah, you may have a choice. I may give you
Okay.
like 2 or 3 possible prompts related to the stories, or it may be just one.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not going to help you out. I mean, you need to prepare
Okay.
all the stories. All right, because if I'm giving you options, then some of you may try to gamble and say, okay, then I'll just focus it on these 3 stories. One of them will have to be the option, and if they're not, then you're going to be in trouble. So really, the most important thing I can tell you, ideally, the best way to prepare
Okay.
is to reread the stories if you can find the time. Review any of the classes that recorded and that are posted. We don't have, again, my morning class did not. My Monday class did.
Because some articles, some short story, I find it so difficult to come plonger, come like get into deeper with it. But some stories, I like it, but some
No, I'm very much aware. Don't worry.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm very much aware of where we're at, and I know some stories are more difficult than others. I take that all into account. All right. I just want you to all be prepared, because it's today's our last day dealing with short stories, because when we come back after the exam, it's time for Macbeth, and that is, keep in mind, all the things that we're doing here with the short stories are applicable to a play, but it's a different format. But you're still looking for the same things. You're still looking for the symbolism. You're still looking for the setting but it's a different way in which you're going to extrapolate an understanding of those things. Because what we don't have in a play is a narrator. So all the information about what's happening and what's going on inside the minds of the characters is going to be conveyed through dialogue, a few stage directions. All right. But again, if you're attentive to how we've been proceeding through these short stories, those same tools that you've been acquiring will absolutely be applicable to the play as well. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other general questions? Okay. So, the lottery. What do you think?
I realized I read it in high school.
It is. I'm not surprised. It's very commonly used. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, my youngest son, who's in high school, had this story in one or two. It's an interesting story because it seems very. I mean, it's jolting when you get to the end and everything else, but it's very straightforward. But what we've come to discover is even when we're dealing with stories that seem to be straightforward, there are layers. And there's a lot being said in the law, quite a commentary on society and civilization and human nature and human behavior. And all those lofty themes that we're encountering in a variety of different ways through our analysis of these stories. Any other general comments, questions?
The text itself easy to comprehend, unlike the other, it's like more ambiguous. But here it's like what you said, and the language, the words that is used is like so normal, so usual. So, but a very nice thing that happened, the twist, like how the turned into a dark end or a sad end maybe.
Or even a horror story on many levels. Yeah, I mean, you notice that some of the texts are more difficult in terms of the language that's being employed. So that would be Mask of the Red Death, Edgar Allan Poe. But with stories, the language is very straightforward. Think of the 3 Day Blow and the Chrysanthemums. A little more involved, perhaps. This seems so basic at times. But of course, and ideally, read the second time so you can start being more attentive to what we're being exposed to when we read it the first time before we know what's coming, right? And of course, that jolt at the end. And it's interesting to note as through it when we start suspicious of what the winner of the lottery, so, I'm sure we had our moments where wait a minute now, they're not telling us about it. And of course, the foreshadowing, literary techniques that are employed. If you noted at the beginning, the boys are, getting these rocks together, right? And, certainly I remember when I first read, boys are going to be boys. They're going to, I had it when I was a kid. Let's see it much today, but you tend to, as you're reading, it drifts away. You forget to some degree about the rocks, and the rocks are essential at the end, and innocent, in which they're first described, placed there by kids. So you're not suspicious in any way. They're going to throw rocks at each other, or, they're going to try and throw bottles somewhere, because everything is so normal. So, matter of fact, I mean, and it's very much, this story very much is depicting almost a idyllic type of, small town environment with nice people, normal, average people that have this, this lottery thing, like a bingo night or something. It's not obvious in any way where this is leading, and of course that speaks very much to a particular that the story has. But what's it about? I mean, we know, not in terms of summarizing, that's easy. But what is this story about?
It is about the tradition. Like tradition from long it's going on, like they are celebrating like a fete.
Very much about tradition, and so it's asking us to reflect on the concept of tradition, and tradition can takes many forms, right? The behavior of communities, of cultures, of religion, where there's this ritualistic component to it that is part and parcel of pretty much every society and culture since the recording of history. All right, and part of those traditions, touch on mundane traditions to, sacrificial traditions that often, and I think one of the things that the story is reminding us is, the initial purpose of setting up the tradition that is still maintained many years later when those conditions in which the tradition was originally set up are no longer applicable, right? Either because the society has evolved or that it's, new explanations to explain that. A lot of traditions going, back many, many years, involve rituals and sacrifices to appease the gods. We have to every year we have to do this, or every month we have to do this to ensure that our crops will grow, to be sure that there'll be rain, right? If you start thinking about the number of differing traditions in even in a single culture or society, and then take all those as a whole, it's really tremendous. And traditions can be even on an individual basis. I'm a bit of a sports fanatic, so when my team is playing, I go through a traditional way of preparing for the game, which is, again, very common. And certainly, if any of you are sports fans, things as the tradition of a tailgate party before a football game, the tradition for soccer matches, especially in Europe and in South America. I'm a big soccer fan and been to games in Europe and South America. The whole ritualistic atmosphere of what the fans go through before the game even starts and what they do traditionally throughout the game. All right. There's the obvious traditions and rituals associated with religion and religious ceremony that touches on every religion. But again, it's also can be, I may be stretching it, but I'm trying to emphasize for impact, individual traditional behavior. Again, and I keep referencing it in terms of ritualistic behavior. When I wake up in the morning, I have, variations thereof, but it's very traditional for me how I proceed. Get my cup of coffee, check my emails, give myself all that time I need before I wake up my youngest son to get him ready for school. So it's really a commentary on these things that we do automatically, traditionally, without really thinking about it. We don't take note of it, and I think that certainly lends itself to the story. They've been doing this so often that we are forgetting about it, and of course, coupled with the fear of what happens if we break the tradition. And this also ties into kind of superstition. That you get into that routine of doing that, and we're not going to stop doing that because then bad things may happen. Again, you have to ask yourself, why do we maintain certain traditions? There's the fear of, then bad things will happen, but then there's, of course, also, on the flip side of that, how traditions keep communities together.
It's so functional and it's everyone.
Okay, hold on, you're too loud. Couldn't hear you. And it was. Yeah, turn that there.
My bad. It's too loud.
Yeah, can you turn it down still? Because it's kind of
Is it better like this?
still very, very loud.
Wait.
Try turning it. Let me see if I can control it on my end. Is that better, Fernwood? I turned my volume down. I don't know if that affects you or not. Still too loud?
Yeah, I think it's too loud. My bad.
All right. Okay, yeah, so try rejoining. Maybe it's something to do with the connection, or maybe type your chat. Okay, Edward? You can. Okay, good. So yeah, well, yeah. So the flip side of it is in terms of communities together, and that flip it over again, because the fear is if you don't maintain the tradition, then you'll lose that connection with the community. And of course, this speaks to another theme that's an offshoot of maintaining traditions, which is identity. How we identify ourselves within the context of the community in which we're in. Because this, it's always a big issue. Certainly, we'll see it when we get there in a number of the stories that we've had. How we identify ourselves, right? In terms of what do we know about ourselves? Do we know ourselves all that well? Do we spend the time to know who we are and formulate an identity in that kind of individual way? But of course, much of our identities are formulated in relation to the community in which we live. I identify as a parent, as a father, right? That's because I have in my environment children, right? So it spreads out in many different ways. These two things, tradition and identity, and security. Security both in terms of the belonging to that community, but security as well in an understanding of the self. And this story really ruptures that in pronounced ways, which we have to look at because of the level of not just violence, the ease in which the person who wins the lottery is rejected from the community, but also rejected by their family. And not only is that acceptable, it's encouraged. And that kind of throws the whole notion of the positive aspects of a tradition. In the case of the story, it throws that out the window. But of course, we're looking at it in a broader sense, right? We look at the specifics of the story, but then we are trying to apply that to a broader picture and understanding of ourselves within our communities, in our societies, and within ourselves, in terms of how we come to understand our own behavior and our own engagement with ritualistic traditions that we engage in all the time. And the story is asking us to reflect upon that. What else? Other comments? Note the emphasis in the story on family. That's the juxtaposition of these seemingly, very, very family-oriented. Right? There is a hierarchy. Right? The man has his role, the woman has her role. Right? And we see that very much. Who's going to draw? Right? If you have a son old enough, then the son will draw, not the wife, not the mother.
Even they are giving chance for kids also by giving the rocks, keep the rocks,
Yeah.
means from their childhood they are teaching them that is a ritual
Yes,
they will do in future.
yes, and that's
Yes.
to continue that tradition.
Yes.
And of course, the whole family structure is predicated on traditional values. Okay, so in terms of the role of the individuals within that family structure are very much set. They're not challenged, right? And you see how we can now bring this to a more topical issue in terms of, say, women's rights, right? The role of a woman in our society versus the role of women in other societies where there is a more matriarchal structure and tradition versus the patriarchal society, which tends to predominate in many Western cultures. But where does that come from? And it often comes from traditions that were initiated in very different times. And I think we're meant to, maybe reflect on that by saying, okay, this was initiated when this was the situation, but that situation doesn't exist anymore. So why are we still doing it? If to make a fairly bit of a leap in terms of an analogy, if you follow politics in the United States, the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment is an amendment in the American Constitution that stipulates, for the most part, the right to bear arms, the right to have a gun. And this is embraced by a large population in the States as being part of the American tradition of being able to defend yourself by carrying a gun. Right? And you're not going to take the guns away from me because A, it's written into the Constitution, but of course it comes out of a tradition of being able to defend yourself in the American society of 1700s and 1800s. Well, the world was a very different place then. So all those specific reasons that that tradition formulated and was ultimately written into the American Constitution are challenged by some, those who want to put greater restrictions on gun laws. But the counter argument to them has always been, no, it's in the Constitution and it is part of our way of life. But the reality in the sense of what life was like in North Dakota in 1884 or 1784 is very different than what it is today. So should we be then challenging those traditions that lead to this insistence on keeping the Second Amendment? And where I think one of the issues, related to that comes in is rather than looking at it specifically and analytically about how societies change, and it's really not appropriate to be walking around with a gun on your hip because you don't have the same fears or concerns that you did 200 years ago. Societies tend not to look at those specifics when it comes to tradition. Because just the fact that it's a tradition, it's part of their identity. And if you take away my tradition, you are taking away a piece of me. So it's almost followed blindly. And of course, that's what we see in the story. Right? There's a few little chirping voices. There's some communities have done away with the lottery and so on. But the general consensus is, no, we can't do that because then we'll turn into barbarians. If we don't have our tradition, we will lose our way of life. can't we adapt? And even to the point in this story where we see we're never really told what the purpose of this tradition was. Was it a sacrifice to appease the gods? Was it, to ensure that we have a good crop? Was it to ensure that we weren't going to have hurricanes or tornadoes? It doesn't seem to matter because it's a tradition. And therefore we have to abide by it. And of course, another element in the story that, it reveals is in following the tradition, especially when you don't even remember why that tradition was initiated, is it detrimental to our humanity? Because look what the people become at the end of the lottery. They become a mass murdering crowd. Other aspects of it, of course, is randomness. That's the idea of a lottery, right? If there is a reason to sacrifice someone from the village every year, let's just say there were, how do you go about choosing who's going to be sacrificed? In this case, it's utterly random. It's a lottery. It's chance. As opposed to saying, okay, if we have to make a sacrifice, let's analyze this. Who is the worst person in the community? With something, who's broken the law? Who's in jail? That doesn't come into play here at all. And it seems to be very much emphasized that it needs to be random. Dressed up, perhaps, as suggesting that therefore it makes it fair. No one has to pass judgment on who's going to be sacrificed.
Question, Professor.
Yes.
Do you believe like it's already an every year tradition that somebody will be stoned to death in that story?
Okay. Anyone else want to respond? Is the story telling us that this is a ritual that's going on every year? Every year someone gets stoned to death in this community.
The writer put us in a setting of, a festive, where everything is joyful, everything is in a proper order. The writer let the reader imagine that on the first attempt upon reading, like, wow, it's like festive, joyful, lottery. And then, as what you've said, it's like it's already a yearly, like a ritual tradition. So like, is the writer deceiving the reader?
No, I don't think so. I think it's very, very much, that's the point, that they do this every year. And every year they stone to death one member of their community randomly. And yet, when the lottery comes up the following year, it is, as you pointed out, Sherwin, festive, almost joyful. And that's troubling, to say the least. Kind of reminds you of the movie The Purge. I was actually thinking, The Purge is the one where every year everyone gets to go out and kill whoever they want. Is that The Purge? Yeah, I think I saw the first one.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. No, that's a good connection to make. As I recall in the movie, though, and maybe that's something that can be applied to the story, that the main reason for the purge is to allow people to unleash, get all that pent up because of all the restrictions we have to live under in our society and the compromises we have to make to follow the rules. We can let it all hang out one day a year. So maybe that same thing is going on here in the lottery. Because note, when they do go for the kill, there is a return, because we have a little bit of tension before that because she resists, but then there's a return to an almost gleefulness. So a kind of purge. That's a great connection to make. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, note as well the extremity of it, because as you recall, the way the lottery works is, someone picks for the family, and then the family that is chosen, then they all have to go and pick individually, because one of them is going to die, and they even have the children. So conceivably, it could have been the very young child
Sir,
who got the black dot.
Sir, I think I also perceive it that not every one of us view death as sadness. Like, for example, for the author, maybe he view this story as joyful because you're gonna die and it's a new phase of life. So I think death is not. We don't perceive it, every one of us, in a different way. We don't.
Which is very true. The question I would have then in response to that is, do we get the sense from the story, not from our own personal beliefs, but from the story, that the townspeople would be celebrating because the person who wins the lottery has the honor of dying and going to the other world, paradise, whatever it may be? Does the story suggest that that's the attitude of the townspeople? Not just the person who.
I feel like they're both half because they're adapting to this new environment. I think inside of them they're like old fashioned, but they're trying. I don't know how to explain it, but they're trying to adapt this new accustomed to this new tradition. So
Right, but this tradition specifically with the lottery is not new, right? This is, they can't even remember when it started. It's been going on for so long. Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, it's an interesting question to ask. Again, I would suggest that if that was the case, we'd have to be able to find evidence in the text that would suggest that it is an honor to be chosen. And just in the fact of the way that the killing is done, I mean, it's brutal. They're stoning her to death. So there's tremendous suffering that the victim is going to experience. It's not like, someone's just going to come and shoot you. You are going to be beaten to death, slowly, with rocks, thrown at you by everything from old men and women to young children.
Honestly, sir, that sounds fun.
Yeah, okay.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I will give you the benefit of the doubt to appreciate the dark humor there. But and it's to be stoned to death by your own children as part of the mob, as part of the society, as part of that community. The individual is sacrificed in order to maintain the structure and foundation of that community, which is predicated on a tradition. And of course, we're asked to question that. That's why it's such an extreme ending. Again, it seems, and we're going to look at the text closely together, it seems to be there's a sense, without any specific evidence to substantiate it, that the belief is that in order for us to continue to live as we are living in this idyllic community, we have to kill someone every year from that community. And if you truly believe that the alternative would be that our community will crumble, our identities as a community and as individuals will crumble, are threatened if we break the tradition, then that seems to spill over into kind of superstition, because there's no empirical evidence that can be employed that would confirm that the society will crumble. And of course, the counter argument to that would be, yeah, because we're killing someone every year. And the evidence that it would destroy our community if we didn't is too much of a risk, because then, okay, we're not going to do it this year and then watch our community fall apart. So we can't have evidence until after the fact. We're not willing to take that gamble. I mean, that's part of it, but there's also the part of it's so incorporated into their way of life that it's not even questioned. There's very little question, and well, again, when we look at the text, there's only one person who does. Yeah. Okay. So what Sherwin, what you're bringing up there, and you can all see it in the chat, inspired by Jewish. It's not just Jewish tradition. There's many traditions that have sacrifice, whether it's stoning or others, but there's a lot of evidence of the stoning as well, as part of their tradition. You see, what you're referring to, when somebody violates the Jewish law, that's a very specific act, and it's very, I would argue it's quite different than this one, because of the randomness and the innocence of the person who is chosen. If you are going to stone to death someone who broke the law, whether it's Jewish law or whatever other religious law or civil law, capital punishment. If you, in many states in the United States, if you commit murder, you're executed. That's not really the same thing as a tradition. That is an adherence to laws. Still part of the community and the society that are written into it, but it's not so much predicated on the same kind of tradition, unless we go back further in the tradition of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? Which then gets into, the kinds of punishment, but it's always predicated on punishment for a violation of something. This is not a punishment for any violation. It's not even presented as a punishment. It's purely a tradition. It's similar to the tradition of what? Hanging a flag during the World Cup of the team that you support. Okay? It's so matter-of-factly that kind of thing, not predicated on the actions of any specific individual. And that's important to know, and I'm glad you brought that up, Sherwin, because it's important to see that distinction. The emphasis on the fact that it is a lottery. Utter chance that you'll be chosen. So if it had an element of punishment and reward, that would be something that would have we'd be able to grasp in a more rational way. This is targeting and discussing specifically traditions that don't have that. The ritualistic behavior that so many communities follow without even thinking about why they're doing it. If it's a punishment and reward type of action, then you are thinking someone broke the rules. Or if you flip that, you know, someone did something really great for the community, so the tradition will be, we're going to make them mayor, or we're going to give them gold because they did a great act. But that is predicated on the specific actions of that individual. This isn't. So we have to make that distinction. Again, I'm glad you brought up, of the different kinds of traditions. All right, and what actually constitutes a tradition.
But sir, I have a question. What is the difference between tradition and ritual?
Well, ritual would be more of the specific actions, right? Ritualistic behavior. All right. A tradition doesn't necessarily have to have, but almost always does, the actions, right? A ritual is actions that are taken in relation to the tradition. All right. So, but the tradition itself is the reasons, right, that those actions were first incorporated into that culture or society. Right, as Sherwin is saying, there are traditions that don't have, well, most traditions will have some element of ritual, but again, nothing like what we're seeing in this story. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a tradition that does not have some kind of a ritual to it. It's a good question, because they almost inevitably have some kind of action that, because if it's just a tradition in the mind without action of some sort, then it probably wouldn't remain a tradition. It would just be an idea. So in order for it to be tradition, there has to be something that demarcates it as something that we traditionally do. So it may not be necessarily completely ritualistic in the theological sense of the word, but it would almost inevitably involve some kind of action.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. Oh, jeez, my goodness, it's 1:20 already. All right, let's get to the text. This was good, guys. You know, this is the best way to start any. I wish my other classes, you know, 45 minutes of before I put the text up, because there's great questions and great observations coming up. Let's look at the text, because we always remember everything that we're discussing always has to be rooted in the text, and always when we talk about it, especially when we're writing an essay, to be rooted in the language of literary analysis. Okay. Oh, where is it? I just had it up. It's probably right at the top. Right. Okay. Why is it? It's weird. Huh. Okay, that's going to be a little funny how we do this. I'm not used to this. Anyways, all right, everyone can see it? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so as always, right, we always start with the title. It alerts us, and of course, when we see the title, what are we thinking about? It's a lottery. Someone's going to win a lot of money, right? That's going to be our first, and of course that's very intentional. Is okay. It's going to be about a lottery, and it doesn't seem to have any necessarily negative connotations, right? We can make our arguments about whether lotteries are good or bad, right? When we think of the traditional, the 649. And, you know, is it really a good thing? Well, yes, everyone has an opportunity to win a lot of money, but at the same time, how much money people spend, They'll spend $500 and then win $10 and they're all happy. Well, they'd lost $490. And of course the gambling aspect of it and so on. But that, again, these are associations we make when we first see the title, anticipating that there'll be some variation thereof. Note as well that it's very detailed, right? We get exact date. It's June 27th, and it's the morning. And yes, the description was our setting, right? Remember, we're always looking at the setting. Clear, sunny, fresh warmth, full summer day, flowers, blooming profusely. Not just blooming, profusely, big time. And the grass was not just green, it's richly green. People are gathering. What's noticeable here, because we know how we always spend time looking very specifically at the opening paragraph, setting the tone and giving us the setting, is the details and, of course, the atmosphere it creates.
Sir, is the date June 27th, is it important? Because I look it up in internet. It says the end of World War II, I think, or World War I. Is that make a link with this thing, with this article, or is it random?
Yeah, not to my knowledge. I don't think it has a specific. It's a good question. I'm very impressed that you looked it up. I love that. But no, I think in this story, it's mainly there just to show us that the details, that the narrator is going to be very specific to create a very realistic setting, detailed, which is all, I would argue, set up to be juxtaposed against the
There's
trauma.
a feeling of too good to be true.
Yes, it's idyllic. And that's meant to be very much in contrast to the horror of what happens at the end, right? That juxtaposition between this beautiful setting and the sun is shining and it's summer and there's children and family, and then boom, they all turn into savages. That's not even fair to say they turn into savages, because they don't do it necessarily in a savage way. It's a savage act, but they seem to do it, as a matter of course. And okay, but in this village where there was only about 300 people, so what is that telling us? Very small town, very close-knit community, right? Important. It's not in a city here. Everyone knows everyone in a 300 people populated town. It's important because that means that what they've been doing every year is they're all killing someone they all know, and all know pretty intimately. It's such a small town. Then note here, again, as we pay attention to even the smallest details, the children, right? So we see right away there's children, right? The innocence of children assembled first, of course. It's a little, again, one of those subtle things that you want to be attentive to. The children assembled first. Okay. The children assembled first, of course. What is that suggesting to us about what's going to transpire in this lottery? Because we already know that there's going to be a lottery. The village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank around 10 o'clock, and sometimes there were so many people. The lottery took 2 days. But we know they're preparing for something. They're preparing for whatever this lottery is. And the children are there first, of course.
Because the children are the one who is curious about the things, especially when they listen the term lottery or anything.
Curious, but also that sense of innocence, right? We associate children with the lack of experience, and therefore are emblematic of innocence. And so that brings in that concept of innocence in this idyllic, beautiful summer, rich grass, flowers everywhere, and children running around. Okay. School was recently over, and so we have now, again, liberty, freedom, the irony. Because, of course, none of them have liberty. Because in a couple of hours, any one of them might be stoned to death. We don't know that when we're first reading it. But now when we come back to it a second time, we're realizing all these little things that are dropped in our path along the way to disrupt us. So we have this idea of liberty thrown in here when we know that it's anything but. Talking about the school, all right, the classroom and the teacher, again, conveying the ordinariness of it, but also bringing in the concept of education and learning. And what we associate with education and learning is then, to some degree, questioning and being able to make rational choices because we're educated. Tradition, ritualistic behavior, is often counterintuitive to rational, educated analysis of why you're doing that. If you're having a ritual because you want to ensure that your crops will grow, so you're doing a ritual from a tradition as a sacrifice to the sun god or another god. Well, then science and rationale and education will come in. Well, I don't think slaughtering that horse is why you're going to have rain this spring. And that shows again how these kinds of rituals clash with the rationale, but nonetheless are still very powerful, because often tradition, and I think this story shows that, and ritual are trying to address issues that the rationale and science cannot answer completely. Right? The scientist says, that's not going to bring rain next month. And the retort to that could be, yeah, but what do you know about how much rain there's going to be next month? And if any of you follow the weather forecast, they get it wrong so often. So, science can't tell me if it's going to rain or not. So why would I take a chance? We get, the names of these three boys. And of course, when we're first reading this, okay, they're obviously going to be major characters, right? In a sense, they are, because of the stones, I suppose. But again, it's trying to convey this ordinariness and really put us off the path that it's actually heading. But we do have here, Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones. And the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. And eventually they make a pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of other boys. So what we're getting here with the boys and their stones, it doesn't really give us an indication at all as to what they're going to do. In retrospect, it does. Oh, they're piling them up there. But, they're stuffing them in their pockets. And this little bit here against the raids of other boys really conveys the idea that the stones are just there because the boys are going to have a rock fight. We'll put our stones in this corner. They're going to be over there. And I guess after all this stuff, when the parents, when the grown-ups aren't looking, we're going to have ourselves one hell of a good time. We get here then about the girls. And remember, this is a very much a traditional small town with the small town traditional type of roles that everyone plays. And there's a commentary on that as well in this, I would suggest. Because here we have the boys who are going out doing all, getting the rocks, and they're all set for a big raid. And then the girls to the side. Right? So right away, they're separated. Talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. So again, it seems very subtle, but as we know, as we continue reading, there are specific roles assigned to gender here. And that's coming from tradition. That's the way it's always been. Men are in charge and women need to stand aside. You don't see the girls going around collecting the rocks, even though they'll use the rocks at the end, because everyone participates at the end. But for the actual getting everything ready, that's a man's job. Commentary on that tradition. Okay, so we have soon the men began to gather. Speaking of, to get enhance and convey to us the setting, planting and rain and tractors and taxes. What is that telling us about this community? Oh. They're farmers, right? It's a farming community. Planting, rain, tractors, and inevitably the taxes, which everyone, farmer or not, has to pay. But it's certainly enhancing that setting and the atmosphere of this idyllic small village for farming community. Salt of the earth, if you will. Okay, and then the women wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, right? Faded because they've been used over and over again. It's not a rich community. It's an isolated community, a no-nonsense community. They're faded because they're washed. They're washed because we use them a lot, right? It's practical. Again, stereotypes all over the place, right? Exchange bits of gossip, and then, of course, go to join their husbands. Emphasis on the role of the men, and the father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. That is our setting up to here. And it does a very good job, I would suggest, of really giving us this idea of the kind of community we're dealing with. And what is noticeable is it is such an ordinary community. So, you know, whatever traditions they have, whatever this lottery may be, you know, what could it possibly involve that would, whatever it involves has to follow, we would think, with everything else we're learning about these people in this village. We're introduced to Mr. Summers, right, the man who conducts the lottery, position of authority. His description, he's a jovial man, round-faced jovial man. Get that image in our head. He ran the coal business. So there's mining here as well. We have farming. Again, emphasizing the ordinary, the worker, right? The average, the farmers, the coal miners, and so on. It's really appealing to that averageness of people. And that's important because it's not, if there was extraordinary, if they were a special group of people, then okay, then, you know, maybe that elitist group does this crazy stuff. But this is trying to convey that this is universal. Working men, working women, salt of the earth. People sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was scolded. The emphasis here, of course, is on family. They feel sorry for him because he has no children. right? It's starting again, we've already gotten a sense of that here, of the importance of family. Again, the irony of, people we associate with a dedication to family and so on are the people we tend to trust the most, that would always look out for their family, do everything they can to keep their family out of harm's way. And that comes back to what I was saying before. Why do they continue this year in and year out? The suggestion is there's a belief embedded deep within their society and the individuals of that society that we need to do this to preserve our idyllic community and our families. That we have to do this, which will obviously disrupt a family, but it doesn't seem to be suggested that it will destroy a family, since the family members themselves accept it. And a necessary action in order to preserve what we have. And we have to preserve this because it's perfect. Casualness, a little late today, folks. Again, it's natural. We have, of course, the symbol of the black box. What do we know about this black box? What does the story tell us about the black box?
It's a very old box which they are using from long time and for the lottery.
Right. Why don't they replace the box with a new box?
Maybe they are thinking tradition part point of view.
Okay. Well, again, the black box, as we find out down here, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. The black box is the symbol of this tradition. So preserve it so we keep the purity of that tradition. But again, if the box is falling apart and the box symbolizes the tradition, then that is a means by which to suggest that the tradition is falling apart, or maybe should be falling apart, that it's antiquated and no longer necessary. We have the papers that they use. What did they use before the papers?
Wood.
Yes, the wood. So that it's a demonstration by showing that they do modify it. They have updated it to some degree. Right? That goes back to what I was saying. Again, when you look at the circumstances in which the tradition initially began, and are those circumstances as they evolve, shouldn't the tradition evolve as well? So the original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago. Okay, so again, sorry, you know how I do this. It's hard for me to pass over anything once I start reading it. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago. What's that suggesting? Similarly to what I mentioned a few times now. The original, which connects to the idea of the original purpose, has been lost long ago. Do you see the connection? The original paraphernalia, all that stuff that we used for the originally for the lottery, has been lost. Suggesting, especially with the use of the word original, the original reasons for this are lost. Doesn't matter. And the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Okay, so that's telling us how old the tradition is. The lottery, it's long before the oldest man in town, and it's emphasizing this idea of longevity in this tradition. He talked often about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. So Mr. Summers spoke frequently about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by. They don't want it to change. The people don't want it to change. And we're asking ourselves, why? Why? At this point, we're not asking it when we're reading it the first time because we don't know what it is. Tradition, tradition's good. It's and so on. Until we take a good hard look at it. Had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it and the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. So it's tracing the lineage with this box, that there's a piece of even the original box that was used in this one. And you see how that lends itself to the concept of tradition. You have a piece of what it would originally was, and that keeps it alive through the generations, emphasizing the idea of tradition here in a big way, that even when you have to replace something, you take a piece of what was there originally to keep that continuity with the past. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking about a new box, but every year the subjects were allowed to fade off without anything being done. And the black box grew shabbier each year. So now that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's suggesting that if the black box is getting shabbier, is their tradition getting shabbier? I don't know. By now it was no longer completely, no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. So it's curious, this bit, to me, because again, it's a very curious story. It's contrary to what we may have been thinking before, it's not an easy story, because if the black box is now faded or stained, and the black box symbolizes the tradition of the lottery, that would suggest that the lottery is now faded and stained. But at the end, and we want to ask ourselves, this is when we get to, is it? There doesn't seem to be anything faded or stained. They seem to be doing it exactly what they've always done. Matter-of-factly stoning someone to death. If it was faded or stained, maybe now they would just flog them. Or, put them in the stockade, those old, like this, so you don't have to kill them. Killing them is the extreme. It's the purity of the original act. If it's been faded or stained, then it would be modified in some way, but it's only the box. It's not the actual tradition.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
If we want to compare like this, it is faded and the traditional is fading, means like this, they were doing, but they don't want to do it. We can't see anything in this text. Say people want to, means they are disagree with this. They don't want to do this.
Well, it's a great point, because don't we though? And I think this is where the faded or stained comes into play to some degree. It's difficult, but because we do have them mentioning other towns that have done away with the lottery. Right? And we do have her objections saying it's not fair. Remember, before she even picks the final one. So that's a challenge to it. So maybe the faded or stained is suggesting that there is some pushback, but not so much from this community. But other communities have done away with it. No, but when we see this, that's what maybe we're expecting, so that's what we would be looking for. Let's do it. Was trying to stir the paper, stir in his hand, because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded. Again, another indication. And again, this is somewhat troubling. If it's faded and stained and forgotten and discarded big parts of it, it's suggesting that it isn't relevant anymore. It's old, it doesn't really belong here. And we've forgotten exactly how we do it, and we've discarded other things. So that takes away the idea of the veracity of the ritual, the veracity of the tradition. And yet they're still doing it. So
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question too, because at the start of the story, it says about the children, the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. Are they scared what will happen to in a way? I wonder.
You know, that's a great observation. They do.
From before, I've been thinking of it, but I was shy to comment. I go, maybe.
Never be shy to comment. Everyone, always remember that. Yes, it does say the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. I'm glad you brought it up, and we should take a look at that. What is that suggesting? School was recently over, so they're out of school. Out of school suggests liberty, right? You don't have to go to school every day. Yay. But that feeling of liberty, freedom, is uneasy on most of them. What does that possibly suggest, given that we know what happens in this story? That they're not comfortable with the sense of freedom. Well, that would make sense. Because, in fact, despite all them running around gathering their rocks and everything else, none of them are free. Because they're all bound to the lottery. No matter how much freedom they have during the time in between the lotteries, the lottery is always looming. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And we're all bound by it. And if we're chosen, then we have to go and face that death. So, you can really extrapolate from that. The sense of freedom is uncomfortable because there's always the sense that we have to deal with the lottery, which could mean death. If you want to expand on that and bring that out into a wider picture, it's a commentary on the whole concept of liberty, when our freedoms are always restricted. Even outside the restrictions imposed upon our sense of freedom by society, is our freedom is also restricted by ever looming death. We don't have control of that. Pure freedom would also involve, arguably in this line of thought, pure freedom would also involve control over mortality. Right? Freedom means you're in control. So I mean, I'm drawing that out even further, but it's a very important observation that that feeling of liberty is uneasy on them because perhaps they know, and we know now, it's not a true full liberty, right? Because of what's about to transpire.
Plus, maybe they've seen it before, those who are old enough, and they're sort of scared in a way, but they can't say it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, certainly they've seen it before. I mean, they're all getting the rocks ready, and it happens every year. And that's another one of the more troubling aspects of the story is they all know what's coming, and they're also matter of fact about it. Not just in the sense of that they're going to participate in it, but any of them could be chosen. So it comes back to, I think it was Marlene who said earlier, maybe it's because they don't fear death, and that death can be seen, and it is in many communities, as a kind of reward. But we don't get any sense of that here. That's what rocks the boat, so to speak. Because you would think they know what's coming and that any of them could be chosen. If why aren't they scared?
Sir, I watched documentary in some other culture. They perceive death in a different way. It's a festive thing to do. Like it's like christening in Catholic, but for
It's
us, like here.
well, certainly. I mean, there's many instances of less so in today's world, but certainly in more ancient worlds, where yes, death to be chosen for the sacrifice would be an honor, because then, because you're being chosen, you will be that much more rewarded in the afterlife. Okay, we see that in terms of concepts of martyrdom and things like that in today's society, in certain communities, in certain societies. That, you know, there's a special place for those who make ultimate sacrifices and so on. But we're not getting that here. And we are very much dealing with, you know, without it saying specifically this is all happening in South Dakota or wherever, we're certainly getting the sense that this is taking place in an American community, which then would involve, for the most part, certainly the way this community is described, a traditional American small farming community, where that kind of welcoming of death is not part of the thinking. But it's, again, it's a good point to bring up, because when we try to wrap our heads around what they do at the end, that would be fitting in a community that had a different concept of sacrifice and death. And that's what makes it so jarring, because this community doesn't. It is the traditional American Christian farming community that we're dealing with here. But everything they do at the end is utterly opposed to that. It's almost like a conflict between certain traditions. So that would help to explain the unease at the feeling of liberty. Note as well that the casualness in this whole paragraph talking about the black box, in terms of, you know, the night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Gray made up the slips of paper and put them in the box, and it was then taken to the safe at Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the day. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It spent 1 year in Mr. Graves's barn and another year underfoot in the post office. And sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. Other than on this day, right, and this is what's being emphasized here, other than on this day, this box, which is the symbol of this tradition, is almost meaningless. It's, you know, sometimes it's in the barn, sometimes we keep it in the post office. You know, you better go check the Martin grocery. It might be on one of the shelves there. And it's dusted off and brought off and for this one day. And again, at this point, we're saying, okay, so, you know, it's a lottery. It's just, you know, one of those traditional events that people have once a year. It can't be of any great importance if it's being left in the Martin grocery during the rest of the year. It's got to be, you know, just a minor thing. But of course, it's the most extreme thing imaginable. That juxtaposition and contrast between what it does on this day and what it does for the rest of the time, and the inability to reconcile that with the extremity of what it represents. Taken for granted. Put it in the grocery store.
Sir, I have
Yes.
a question. Is that passage mean that this tradition is slowly fading or something else?
No, it's suggesting both, right? I mean, I think that's the point, that it is fading and it's staying, and the box is you know, put here, it's put there, as if no one really gives much thought to this tradition, except for on the 27th.
Is it like a memory pushed back in the back of their head? It's like a bad memory that they,
Well,
I don't know.
you'd think, given what we know happens at the end, that kind of like The Purge. Someone brought up The Purge, right? As I recall from the movie, yeah, during the rest of the year, you're trying not to think of that day, because on that day, crazy things are going to happen. So you're pushing it aside, and then on that day, everyone gets very tense. Some people gleeful because they get to go out and kill people, others terrified because they don't want to be killed. But everyone changes on that day in The Purge. Nobody's changed here, other than the gathering rocks. They're seemingly, it's just like another normal day. So, and that's jarring as well, and especially when we look at it, as Marlene pointed out, this passage, which seems to be suggesting that it's really not that significant. Does that mean that they forget about it? But then when they do pull it out, you would expect, oh, is it the 27th? Oh, no. Well, no. Hey, it's the 27th. Oh, it all seems to just be part of the daily existence. Look, it's almost break time. Okay, let me just try and get a little bit more here. Okay, there was lists to make up, the heads of the families, how to. So note the details as well, right? How involved this becomes. After this, saying sometimes it's left in the grocery. Now, okay, there were lists to be made up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. Notice how that line is written. There were lists to be made up, and then there's a list of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. Right? List to be like, there's a list. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered, again, memory, and memory is important here. There had been a recital of some sort performed by the official of the lottery, perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Again, emphasizing that things have faded. There used to be chanting, right? Real traditional type of ritual behavior, right? The chanting and of course, when we see chanting and a recital, it does conjure up religious imagery, so that this ritual seemed to have been something of having some kind of theological dimension to it. But that stuff's already been passed now. Now it's very casual, right? And that's another contrast to see. The casualness in which they do this, as opposed to what it was in the past, where there was the recital and chanting. And the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he sang or sang. It used to be much more staged. So the fading and all this stuff seems to certainly be part of it, but they're still doing it. And that could also suggest that it's so ingrained into their way of life that it's no longer an exceptional thing in their lives. And often rituals associated with traditions, again, if you think of it in terms of religion and theology, the rituals that are performed in churches around Christmas time, in synagogues on Yom Kippur, in every religious community on the high holidays, there are ritualistic and very often rigid ritualistic actions that people take on those specific days of high holiday. You know, and even you know, to the ritualistic means by which people pray, right? It's very formal, especially on the high holidays. But we're seeing here this ritual for the tradition is now just, you know, laid back. You know, can get the kids together. I mean, as we see, you know, it's like running in late. Oh, I forgot it was today. And of course, we know who that is. But years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been also a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box. But this also changed with time. Until now, it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. So we're seeing everything here to suggest that yes, as we would expect, modifications to the ritual have taken place. We've evolved. And we're almost seemingly here hanging on just because it's part of what we do, right? This is often the case with traditions, not so much in the theological, religious sense, but in other traditions, that we maintain them and we continue to do them even though their original purpose, which is often predicated on something that now has been disproven, but we hold on to it because it's a way for us to maintain a sense of identity with our community. And all this is making that suggestion that the box is faded and stained, that, you know, we're not doing all the things we used to, which means, again, we're still doing it, but it doesn't have the same importance that it once had. And this is, again, very particular to traditions. Yeah, we just keep doing it. Why not? It keeps us in touch with our past. Reminds us of the past. But, yeah, we don't really believe it. And I think that's very intentionally being conveyed to us in these passages. Ultimately, to have the impact and the shock of what the end result of this ritual is. Okay. All right, it's 2 o'clock. I think it's a good place to break, but keep that in mind that, you know, everything is set up to lead us towards, you know, okay, what it's going to be. It's obviously not that important to them anymore. But it's important enough, and I get it, so that they can have their communal identity, as is the case with most traditions. But then, of course, that gets turned on its head. Okay, it's 2 o'clock. We'll come back. We will finish this up, and then at the end, I do want to talk about the exam and address any questions you may have. Okay, we good?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll see you in 2:30. All right, everyone, have a good break. Yes.
The midterm will be online, right?
Yes, so I'll come back to it at the end, but just, yeah, since you're asking, the midterm is going to be next week during our class time online.
Okay.
You should have all received a package explaining how we're going to proceed. What you need to know first and foremost is everyone has to have their camera on. And everyone has to unmute themselves. I am mandated that if your camera's not on or if you are muted, you are not allowed to take the exam. You get a 0. All right, this should have been explained in the package that you've received. I have no control over that. But I've been told that if your camera goes off, I can give you one warning, put your camera on. If you don't, I have to throw you out of the class and I cannot accept your exam. They're being very strict with this. So if you're having any issues with your cameras or anything like that, I mean, you're probably going through exams in other classes this week as well, so you know this, okay? In terms of how you're gonna write it, initially they wanted us to have you handwrite it, then scan it, convert it to a PDF, and upload the PDF. I advocated fiercely to allow you to be able just to type it into a Word document. And they relented, they agreed. So you will be asked to type it into a Word document and upload the Word document through the assignment portal. Yes, you will keep your books, have your notes. I know some of your classes don't let you. I don't have a problem with that. The nature of what we do is there's no reason not to allow you to have it. Caution, I've mentioned this before, is especially with your notes, if you've been taking extended notes, is that you don't want to get bogged down trying to find things in your. I would argue that you won't need your notes if you are prepared, if you've read the stories and you really have a grasp of the themes, setting, tone, all the things that we discuss. If you understand it, the questions that I do are designed so that you can answer them and demonstrate your knowledge of the story aptly by following the thread, the guidance I'm giving you through the prompts. Be sure you answer the question, all right? And be sure, remember the 3 things that I look for when I'm is content, demonstration that you are familiar where you understand the question, you're answering the question. Structure, 5 paragraphs. Intro, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion. Thesis statement, topic sentence, all those basic things that are clearly outlined in the document that I posted. Okay? And then you're writing. And I am taking into account, because things have been challenging, I haven't had a chance to really look at much of your writing. I will take that into for this midterm. So if you are concerned with your level of writing, obviously you do your best. But I see that there's particular issues that are constant throughout most of you. Those will be issues in the second half of the semester, all right, in preparation for the final exam. You know, I recognize this is 101. It's the first English conversation and so on. So I take that into account. But at the same time, the exam is going to be geared so that I would guess that you have plenty of time to do like an outline before you start writing, mini outline, and that you have time to do your revision, do your proofreading of your text. Okay, when it comes to grammar, don't rely, since you're going to be doing it in a document, don't rely on a grammar check. It is faulty. So you follow your own intuitions in terms of where you are regarding your proficiency in grammar. And I will take that into account, mainly looking at this point, at this point for the content. Okay, when we get to we'll say 3 things, but I will be putting more of an emphasis on the writing, because if there's need, we will be spending more time on specific grammatical issues. Right, but take the time, plan your time accordingly in the exam, so that you have time to read it and make corrections. So pretty much for the exam, you are doing a response to the stories. Yes, all right, that's the emphasis here. Your ability to analyze, your ability to demonstrate that you have read this rapidly and concisely and you understand it. All right, but yes, there will still be a certain level of, don't get lazy on me. Be attentive to your writing. I think I mentioned this to you. I teach composition courses at Concordia. So when I get into the zone where I'm going to comment and correct your grammar, it can be quite extensive. Right? It is. Again, that's how I started teaching, was right. So I am a bit of a stickler for the grammar, but I teach a one-on-one class, and it's up to me to be able to recognize if there's issues in the second half of the semester, so that you're prepared to improve for the when it comes to writing. Okay.
Sorry, will you go over the 5-paragraph structure? I'm
Yeah.
asking you because I haven't been in high school for a very long time, so I don't even remember this.
No, my plan is to wrap up by 3:30 with the lottery, and then to spend the last half hour going over that document I sent you and the specifics about that structure. Okay, and that dreaded thesis statement and what that involves. When it's, oh my God, what's a thesis statement? What's a thesis statement? And all this stuff. I will go in and look at that document because I think it's well articulated there. And I will be looking. The statement is important. Okay. All right. Let's get through the lottery first, and then we'll return to the exam, the structure, and so on. Any questions or observations before we go back to the text?
I'm sorry, it might not be time to say this, but it's about the exam.
Yeah.
One of my teachers is like making us share, like, only the teachers able to see our screen. I was wondering if you're doing that as well.
Oh, that in our last meeting at TAB with the staff. Yeah, I might actually. How did it go in your class?
I didn't do it yet. It's next week.
Okay.
But I'm just curious how that's gonna work.
Yeah, that was brought up, and they were strongly advocating for that. That way, I get to. The purpose, as you can gather, all these rules and restrictions, is to ensure that you're not cheating. So if all your screens are up, then I can do it. I can see whether you're going onto the internet trying to find answers. It is much a concern for me because, you know, you're not going to answer to the types of questions I'm asking by searching the internet unless you have a couple of weeks. Okay, you're not going to be able to find the answers in 3 hours. It's really, you know, those true, false, multiple choice types of questions where you can just get the answer. What is the symbol for iron if it's a science class, right? Things like that. But if they're doing that, it's working, then they will strongly recommend that I do it, and I might. Yeah, I mean, I see no reason. And honestly, if you do try to go on the internet to try to find help answers, I think it's just going to have the reverse effect. It's like you're not going to have cohesion and unity because you're not focusing in on preparing to answer the question. You're desperately looking for something that, you know, if you're trying to paste from other things to answering a similar type, it's going to be so obvious to me. And I've been doing this for a while. If anyone's trying to cut corners, cheat. First, I'm going to cheat, right? Because I've caught plenty, and I know what I'm doing. And two, more importantly, here, it's just silly. I just don't be able to get my head around it when people are trying to cheat. You know, if you're reduced to having to cheat when you're in college and university, then maybe that's whether or not you should be in college or university. There's plenty of other things to do. You're here to learn. Cheating is just the opposite of learning. Okay. So yeah, if possible, I may do that. That way, you also don't have to be so self-conscious that I'm seeing your face and your facial expressions as you're trying to why in here and all this stuff. I'd be just seeing what you're writing. Okay. I mean, it is something that I did when we did online at the university so that we can decide what classes to put you in, and we'd have people doing improvements on it. We would online and be always with their screen up. We may do, obviously, but be prepared to do that as long as technologically it's easy. And that's my only concern. But otherwise, yeah. Any other questions while we're on the subject?
So you will give the question related to essay?
Yes.
Essays? Yes.
Yeah. So what I'll be doing is I'll be giving you what's called a prompt, right? It's a question. I tend to give, and I guess because sometimes it adds to the confusion. I tend to give like a lot in my prompts. The idea is so that you have a lot to work with. So if I say, this theme, and be attentive to the symbolism, be attentive to the setting, be attentive to these, that's to give you things to look at. So they're telling you, talk about the symbols. I'm not going to tell you what symbol, but to talk about symbols here when you're answering the question, to talk about figures of speech, to talk about figurative language versus literal language. So I may include that, but I've done that in the past, and I've had students confused, feeling that they have to talk about, and I give you like 5, 6 different literary terms or ideas that you can explore in a question, that people feel I have to talk about all 5 of those things or all that. And that's not just to help give you ideas to latch on to. So the way I word it, I'll read it over with you before the exam starts officially. So we'll start at 12:30. I'll go over the question with you or questions with you, and then pretty much start the clock at 12:45. And you should anticipate having 3 hours.
Sir, can I ask you what is the difference between a theme and a thesis, please? Because I always make mistakes between a theme and a thesis.
So a theme is something that you discover in the story. What is the theme? Like we're discussing the lottery. What's the theme? What's one of the themes in the lottery?
About social thing, about culture,
Tradition, ritual, right? Community. These are themes that are in the story. A thesis is the position you take, the argument that you're going to make.
A thesis is what?
It's the position that you're going to take when you're answering the essay.
Okay.
So the thesis is, your thesis will be, let's say, does the black box represent the demise of traditions in the short story called The Lottery? You would say, take a position. Yes, it does epitomize the demise of tradition in Western culture. Because, and then you would have your reasons why and what you're going to use, the evidence you're going to use to substantiate your claim that does represent the demise of tradition. That's your thesis. That's your thesis statement. And ideally, your thesis statement would include the 3 reasons why. Right? It's a representative of the demise of traditions in Western civilization because it is demonstrated to be fading and stained. I'm just winging it here, obviously. It is also in the manner in which the box is treated by that community, and ultimately by its construction, by having actually used pieces from the past. Okay? Then you would go in and elaborate on those 3 main ideas that relate to the position that you take in your essay. Remember, we'll come back to this and I'll go into a little more detail once you finish with the lottery. Your thesis statement is not a statement of fact. Okay, it needs to be argued. It needs to be there needs to be ability to dispute your position. It needs to be argued. In the lottery, there are instances that involve the use of stones. That's a statement of fact. It's not argumentative. You can't say no, there isn't. No, we're not going to do a quiz today. The quiz is technology. So with the quizzes that you've done, I've gone through them, but in order to get them back to you, I had to put them all into a zip file, and then I'm to upload the zip file through Omnivox, which then should automatically send your assignments back to you with my comments and grade. It worked in one of my classes. Now, your assignments, as I've been told, are somewhere in a cloud that we have to retrieve them. I think we'll be able to. Worst case scenario, God forbid, I'll have to go back and remark them. Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah, it's one of the things that's just driving me out of my mind. All right, and I'm reassessing how this goes, and I don't want to give you more quizzes until I resolve this so that when we return to them, and we will, as you know, I'm going to take the 3 best out of the, I'm anticipating we're going to do 5 or 6. I'm going to take your 3 best. But I want to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed before I introduce that again, because otherwise I'm going to lose my mind. All right, what am I used to? Yeah, I would do a class and then I'd be coming into class and calling out your names and handing them back to you, which I also miss, because then I'd get to see you all and start putting more names to faces other than just the few of you who put your cameras on. So it's been very challenging and extraordinarily aggravating, but we'll get there. Right now, though, I want us to focus in on the midterm. Okay, so no, there will not be a quiz today until I get this sorted out. Right? But be prepared. That means we're going to have that many more in the second half. Yes, write a story about lost files. Yes, I hope you're joking, because that would be, yeah. Any other questions? I mean, since we're on the subject, don't worry, I will come back to that document. We should be able to, yeah, okay, gotcha. All right, let's get through this so that we do have time to go over the structure of your essays that I'll be looking into this page. I mean, we've covered, there's one thing about the law, even though we've barely gone through it, we've covered a lot. Because everything that we're looking for now is anticipating that end. And this is one of those stories that really comes to that. It's all impactful and meaningful because of the end. Without that horrendous end, so much of this wouldn't be fitting in. So now when we're reading it, going through it together, we're reading it while we're anticipating that end. So remember, we were finishing up talking about this duality that, they are following some of the rituals, right? The pieces of paper and the box is still there, but they have discarded others. And what troubles us with that is if you've allowed some of them to fall to the wayside because we're a more progressive society now, why have you not modified your final result? All right. All right. So just as we sort of finally left off talking, turned to several visitors, Mrs. Hutchison came hurrying along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. Clean forgot what day it was. So, again, what is this emphasizing? The naturalness and almost the insignificant of, you forgot what day it was? This is the day one of you is going to be stoned to death by everyone else who's here. So it's that nonchalant that is jarring as well. This becomes really jarring when we're reading it for the second time. Not when we're reading it for the first time, because we don't know the end. And that's very much related to the way that the author has structured the story. It's lulling us very consciously to lower our guard so that the impact at the end will throw us for a loop. And again, and then I looked out the window and the kids was gone, and then I remembered, oh my God, it was the 27th, and I came a running. You're in time, though. They're still talking away up there. Note again, cheerfully. Look the way that everyone is. They're cheerful, soft laughter. Well, now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess we better get started, get this over with so we can all go back to work. It's almost as if this is something we got to do. Let's get it done, because we all have work to do. Okay, and then note here, we get back to the ritual itself, right? We've seen how they've discarded the singing and other things. But then here we see this fairly detailed, and this comes back to the commentary on gender, a very detailed sequence by which people will draw. Right? He's broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him? Me, I guess, a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. Wife draws for her husband, Mr. Summers says. Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie? Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. So this seems to be in contradiction to the way that so many of the other rituals regarding this tradition have been discarded. It's presented to us like this is, they all know that she doesn't have a grown boy to do it for her. But now we have to go through the process of asking such questions formally. Holding on to certain elements of the tradition, letting others go. Who decides that? How do we determine what elements of that tradition should remain and what should be let go? Is there a rational explanation for it? Or is it just haphazard? Is it just chance? Remember, chance is another big theme in this story because it's a lottery, right? And is it just by chance we keep this ritual and we let the other one go? Has anyone put any thought into this? Has anyone sat down as a committee, say, okay, let's draw up some new rules for this, since it's just seeming to take on a life of its own. We're rational people. Let's make it more clear and give reasons for it. Of course, if they were to do that, then they'd have to address what happens at the end and be able to rationalize that which is clearly irrational. The end game here, the final result of the lottery, is not just heinous and cruel and all those things. It's irrational. If there is a rationale for it, we're never told in the story. We can speculate, well, it's because it's a sacrifice they're making and maintaining the tradition in a religious sense that they have to make the sacrifice, otherwise, what's the analogy I'm making? One of those movies about ants, you know, the animated movies about ants? What it's called. Anyway, the ants are collecting their food all year long. And
A Bug's Life.
A Bug's Life.
A Bug's
Yes.
Life.
Right? Remember, and so that's one of the crickets, right? And then the crickets come because it's ritualistic and it's kind of traditional. We bring all this food to give to the crickets. And we do it in a ritualistic manner. It's all set up properly in this spot, and then the crickets come and collect it. Well, the reason for that is, if you don't, then the crickets are going to stomp you. What is the reason for this tradition? And again, it comes back to, if they were to sit there and start asking themselves questions like, why do we let this lapse, this part of the ritual lapse, but we maintain this one? Well, then you'd have to start thinking about the whole thing as a whole. And then you would have to rationalize the most extreme action of this tradition, which is what happens at the end.
In my opinion, it's also as extreme that the family has to choose who is going to go.
Well,
That also is
choose who's going to go where.
who's going to, doesn't the family choose who's going to die?
No, they all pick. So when the family, right? So it's an important distinction to remember. Once they determine which family it is, then all members of that family have to do another draw.
That's what I'm saying. Pick. I didn't say the right word.
Yeah. So they're picking. It's not like, okay, we're the family that's been chosen. Okay, let's have a vote, and which one of us are we going to kill? No, it still emphasizes the chance. The chance begins by which family is chosen, and then there's a further randomness in chance by each family member having to pick another ticket from the lottery, and whoever has that black spot is the one who's going to die. It's again, it's extraordinarily disturbing, because as you remember, even the little kid has to pick, and if that kid got the black dot, they're going to stone the child to death. And we certainly get the impression that's probably happened, because they've been doing this for years and years and years. Horace is not but 16 yet, Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. Guess I got to fill in for the old man this year, right? Mr. Summers says. Liz Holding, then he asked, Watson boy drawing this year, tall boy in the crowd here. I'm drawing from my mother and me. Okay. Again, if the male is of a certain age, then he is the one who is in charge. And again, I emphasize that because I think by challenging traditions, it's also challenging, when we see this whole family structure and this hierarchy, it's challenging this tradition of the role of women in this society, the subservient role that they are asked to play. Not asked, one gets the sense forced to. So again, if you're starting to ask questions about any of these rituals, then you need to ask about that one as well. And that's what they don't want to happen. Because then if people start thinking, so, well, wait, does it have to be like this? We can start changing it, and that's where we see where the older man is starting saying, oh no, then we'll all become, like barbarians. Indicating and advocating for the idea that it's because of this tradition and this ritual that we're able to maintain our abilities to function as a very idyllic, happy community. Small price to pay. We don't want change. Change seeps in with the box fading and things like that, the change of time, but the core stays the same. And the core is not challenged. We get a brief challenge here. It goes nowhere. And that's the whole point of her objecting. Nobody, she's the only one. And she's doomed anyways. We have the character of Old Man Warner, who of course is a representation of that past, that tradition. The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Yeah, again, no one's challenging it. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. They grinned at one another humorously and nervously. So now it's starting to set in. This is when we, as an audience, are starting to go, and because we've been asking ourselves, and now we're starting to ask ourselves a little more intently, what is going to be the result of this? Because before we didn't get this nervousness or humorously. Right? Before it just all seemed so natural and so fun. And then we have, okay, so it seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore, Mrs. Delacroix said to Mrs. Gray in the back row. Seems like we got through with the last one only last week, and time sure. This is emphasizing to us as well the concept of time, not just in terms of, you know, the yearly event of the lottery, but that it goes back so far in time. And we've already mentioned that that is, you know, should be questioned. Why are we still doing this if something that was initiated so long ago? Things change in time. The traditions right? Things change in time, but the traditions don't. And that blocks, or can block, has the potential to block progress, right? So on the one hand, the tradition keeps you rooted in that community and the history of that community and the history of your people, however you want to look at it. But at the same time, if the tradition doesn't evolve, then it's holding that community back at the same time. And choices have to be made. On the one hand, you want to maintain that identity, that communal identity with that particular group, but at the same time, you want to make progress. Can you do both? Okay, so everyone, we have the action here. All the men, for the most part, are going to choose the first lottery. All through the crowd, there were men holding the small folded paper in their large hands, turning them over and over nervously. So note how we're progressing here. No one seems nervous at first. Even when they're starting to gather, they're grinning, they're smiling. Note how the story then starts creating the nervousness through the way it describes. Humorously, nervously, and then again, turning them over and over nervously. That is alerting us, ooh, maybe this isn't a good thing to win the lottery. What is this about? We get this bit here. They do say, Mr. Adams said to Old Man Warner, again, old man, what's emphasized is he's the old man, which is representative of the past, okay, who stood next to him, that over in North Village, they're talking of giving up the lottery. Old Man Warner snorted, pack of crazy fools. Listening to the young folks, nothing's good enough for them. Okay, so I mean, we've all encountered this on some level, right? You know, the young people don't know what they're talking about, and we have to hold on to the tradition of the past, but of course, you know, history has proven that no, it's the next generations that should be bringing things forth and evolving and changing with the times. Emphasizing the old in Old Man Warner means he's stuck in time. He's stuck in the past. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody work anymore. Live that way for a while. Right? So here's the fear. If we don't continue with the tradition, we will lose our civilization. We will go back to living in caves. No one's going to want to work anymore and live that way for a while. Goes on to say, so again, first thing you know, we'll be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery. And that for him, and that seemingly for the entire community, is enough to justify it. Now, of course, that's absurd, given what we know the end result of the lottery is. But you see these types of justifications. Some places have already quit lotteries, Mrs. Adams said. Nothing but trouble in that. Pack, again, of young fools. Of course, it's ironic because we're asking, who are the fools here? What could be more foolish than what they're engaging in? This kind of lottery. But this here, you see the main argument that the older generation, the entrenched generation, the generation that is more familiar with the traditions, this is their attitude, and that it holds sway. It's powerful enough coming from this respected older man that everyone adheres to it and no one's challenging it. Not even the young people. Old man, just so we know, 77th year he's been doing the lottery. Okay, so now what do we get here? Then the voices began to say, it's Hutchinson, it's Bill. Bill Hutchinson's got it. All right, so now we're going to see this is the family that has chosen, that has been chosen. Bill Hutchinson was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, okay, and this is right where we see somebody, all right, speaking of, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, "You didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw it. It wasn't fair." So again, more irony. Why is she bringing this up?
Because she won the lottery. Now their family, her family turned to be stoned to death.
Exactly. It's not like she's bringing it up on facts that you didn't give him enough time to take any paper he wanted. Of course they did. They all had the same amount of time to grab a paper. So is her plea, is her suggesting it's not fair, and it's not because it's random, simply a matter of her, because she got picked, her family got picked. While at the same time, we're all sitting here, especially once we know the end, saying this whole thing isn't fair. But it takes the trauma of now knowing that she's on the short list to get her to react. And is that because she's scared? She's scared for her life? Is she scared for her family's life? And that's only because their family was picked? Is that what it takes to get someone to react? None of the other family members react this way. Which is important to remember. Yeah, exactly. It means old man Warner has never had, he's gotten away with every time. So it's interesting that this is where the first objection comes, and we're questioning it, right? Oh, now you're speaking, and in other words, I guess the question I'm asking is, are we feeling sympathy for her, or do we feel like she's just trying to get out because she has no problem if someone else, in other words, she has no problem. She's not going to say it wasn't fair if another family got picked. So it seems to be very selfish, understandable, but selfish. And if you don't think it was fair, if you're suggesting that there's something wrong with this system, you've got to be consistent and say that regardless of whether you get picked or not. And whoops, what is going on? Okay, there we go. So be a good sport, Tessie, Mrs. Delacroix called, and Mrs. Graves said, all of us took the same chance, and even her husband. Bill, shut up, Tessie. So we have this brief interruption, which we're not sure how to take because it just seems like she's scared, which means it doesn't have the same weight as to acknowledge that this whole thing is not fair. It's outrageous. And then back to casualness. Well, everyone, that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get done in time. He consulted his next list. Bill, he said, you draw for the Hutchinson family. You got any other households in Hutchinson's? And again, we come back to rules and regulations. There's Don and Eva, Mrs. Hutchinson yelled. Make them take their chance. Now, be attentive to who she's referring to. Daughters draw with their husbands' families, Tessie, Mr. Summers said gently. You know that as well as everyone else. And she goes back to it wasn't fair. There's Don and Eva. Who's Eva?
Her daughter?
Yeah. Her own daughter, who you would think she'd be happy, doesn't have to draw, and she wants her to draw with her. So it has us questioning, like with Tessie, is it all just that Tessie is just scared for her own life and not her family's life? And Bill, you know, again, my daughters draw with her husband's family. That's only fair. And I've got no other family except the kids. And as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you. Which somebody said in explanation. And as far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right. How many kids? 3. Explains who they are. Okay. All right then, Harry, you got their tickets back. Mr. Graves not held the plays. I'll take bills and put it in. And again now, I think we got to start over. Ms. Hutchins said as quietly as she could, I tell you it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Nobody saw that. Seems like desperation. And of course, at this point, for us, we're all going, what is going on here? Mr. Graves has selected the 5 slips, put them in the box, and he dropped all the papers, but those onto the ground where the breeze caught them and lifted them off. It's an intriguing image, right? So all the papers that are now no longer in the draw are free, right? There throws them on the ground where the breeze lifted them off. They're all safe. And again, she's listening to everybody, but it's not going to work. Remember, again, the rules. Take the slips and the ritual and keep them folded until each person has taken one. And this, it's so, geez. Harry, you help little Dave. Help your little son choose his paper that may be his death sentence. Take the paper out of the box. So Davey put his hand into the box and laughed. Of course, he is presumably doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, but we can't even be sure. But he's laughing because he's a child and needs help doing this. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand, removed the folded paper from the tight fist, and held it while little Dave stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly. Looked up at him. It's a great line. Nancy next. She's 12. We get this very great, brief snapshot of what would be a typical 12-year-old. And her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers says, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got the paper out. Again, these descriptions bring us back to the ordinariness. This is you know, a great description of just an ordinary 12-year-old, and then the boy with his red face and overlarge, you know, that awkward stage of young, you know, boys turning into men. Then Tessie. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, and then set her lips and went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. She is the rebel. She is saying it's not fair, but we challenge and question her reasons for saying it. Doesn't hold the weight it should, because we're sitting there saying everyone should be saying this isn't fair. Of course, we're not fully cognizant of that yet because we don't know what's going to happen at the end. As I reached in the box and felt around, banging his head, took out the last slip of paper. The crowd was quiet. I hope it's not Nancy. And the sound of whisper reached the edge of it. This last bit here, I hope it's not Nancy, now really makes it clear that something bad's going to happen to whoever it is. There's a build up for that. And that's the structure of the story, the build up to it. And we get the old man here. It's not the way it used to be. People ain't the way they used to be, right? Suggesting what? Suggesting that this defiance and this whatever reasons caused by fear is the old man's disgusted with it. And back in the day, no one complained. We just did it, right? Back in the good old days. All right, open the papers, Harry. Open Dave's. We go through it. Open theirs and both beamed and laughed, turning around, right? That they weren't then, turning the crowd, holding their lips. And Tessie said, Mr. Summers, there was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hudson, blah, blah. Unfolded the paper, showed it. It was blank, and now we know it's Tessie. Show us her paper. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife, forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had the black spot on it. The black spot that Mr. Summers, note the details again, made the night before with a heavy pencil in the coal company office. And her husband holds it up. All right, folks. Look at the casualness. All right, folks, let's finish quickly. Even at this point when we're reading it, we know it's going to be something bad, but it's unfathomable what it's going to be. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. It's such an essential line here, because when it says they still remember to use stones, that's when it clicks in our minds what's going to happen. We may have forgotten about the stones. Just that little bit, and that it's put in a sentence that is talking about villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box. But they still know how to use stones. So all this other parts of the ritual that have been forgotten, and that the black box, the original one, all that, those elements of the tradition that have been discarded, their attitude towards it being, except for the old man, being, it's just something to do. But they remembered to use the stones. It's as if it comes back to the analogy to the purge. Yes, yes. And maybe, I think it's a great analogy, maybe it is continued for that feeling of release in this horrendously barbaric manner. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. So again, the blending of the ritual, because the papers are part of the ritual. The stones are part of the ritual, obviously. Mrs. Delacroix, woman, seemingly a friend of Tessie, selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands. Jesus. And Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands. Gasping, I can't run, you'll have to go ahead, I'll catch up with you. Suggested there. She doesn't want to participate. The children had stones already, and someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Right? We recognize the significance of that. That's Tessie's little boy. And they're giving him stones to participate in the killing of his own mother. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she says. That's the most she can muster. She's saying it isn't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. And the old man warned her again. Come on, everyone. It isn't fair. And then we get, it isn't right. The only voice, which we question the reason that voice has come out, is it just out of desperation to save her own life? Doesn't seem to be because she's fearful for her family's life, because she was trying to give herself better odds by having her sister come, her daughter come and participate. It isn't right. Mrs. Hutchinson now screams, and then they were upon her. So, different kind of story. It's interesting insofar, I would suggest, that most of the stories we've looked at have an emotional component that I would argue is really powerful. And Elisa is crying at the end of the Chrysanthemums. Okay, things like that. This has a very emotional ending, but it's a different kind of emotion. It's not even a sympathetic as much as it's a horror. Without even, and it's only upon reflection that the emotion of that horror can, I think, really come through, because then we have to be thinking about the fact that, no one, her family abandons her. Not only that, but her own small child is going to participate in the stoning death of her. And this is extraordinarily sad and horrific. But it doesn't, the story, the way it's presented, the way it's written, doesn't seem to want to elicit from us that same kind of emotion that clearly Steinbeck is trying to elicit from us in the Chrysanthemums. It's really more to jolt us. And then after that jolt, because it's an extreme jolt, to reflect. And I think that's what we were doing as we went back over it after you've all read it before and start to reflect on what the commentary is about. And it's impactful, and that emotional component is still there because of the descriptions of the people. There's no one here who comes across as being overtly bad, right? The emphasis on making them ordinary people, an ordinary community, average, happy-go-lucky members of a society. The sadness, I would suggest, isn't so much in the death, that's obviously sad. The sadness is that this community is going to do it again next year. And then when we do, as we do as analysts of literature and art, we take it out of the particulars of this story, look at it in the broader picture of communities as a whole, ourselves included, and have us start questioning what we're doing, what traditions in various manifestations we follow without understanding why that leads to injustice or unfairness. And yet we do it almost without thinking. And then we have to throw into that mix while we're contemplating that the other strong element in the story about how chance and randomness can come into the play of these traditions that we follow and render them destructive. Not even invasive, but destructive on a personal level and on a communal level, without us even realizing it. And how much of that is tied up with our need as human beings to continue with those rituals in order to feel that we have value in relation to the community in which we belong. To resist those rituals, to point out that they're wrong, would risk us being ostracized by that community and cast out. And most aren't willing to do that because a big part of identity is in that relationship that the individual has with his or her community, which then allows these traditions to continue. Food for thought. Questions about the story? If you have questions about the exam, hold on a couple of minutes. Any questions about this story or any observations that anyone wants to make before we move on to discussing the exam? We're good? Okay, remember, if you have a question that you have to answer on a story like the lottery, you're going to want to be talking about those specific things, right? The idea of chance, the portrayal of this community as ordinary, average, right? You'd be drawing on things that they're farmers, right? The tillers of the earth. Nothing is more associated with, you know, the average and necessary part of community than farmers. And that's what leads to viewing this in a broader spectrum of all communities. Because it really is a community of every man, every woman. Nothing distinct about them to separate them. And that's greatly emphasized and absolutely, I would argue, necessary in order to be able to see this critique of tradition in its proper light, the way that Shirley Jackson intended. Well, not that we know what Shirley Jackson intended, really the story intends us to know. Any questions then?
Yeah, sir. Here,
Yes.
we are talking about the chance. We can relate like that. Men, they are giving preference to men. Means they are giving chance to draw the lottery, not for the women.
Yes, I mean, the men certainly play the part of the authority figure who are the ones who are going to choose for the families. But then it is reduced to each individual, male, women, and children, to choose the final one themselves. All right. So it's an interesting observation because we're going for this male-dominated and choosing for the families. And you would think then, okay, so let the head of the family, the male, then choose for everyone else. Not at that level, because of the severity of what transpires and what happens to the one who gets the black dot. That's when they are putting it onto the individual so that the chance, I suppose, is relegated to the, in other words, her argument, you know, you didn't give him enough time. Remember, it's a very good observation because she's sitting there saying, no, you didn't give him enough time. And she had no say in it. It wasn't like she was trying to draw it and could have said, no, you didn't give me enough time. You didn't give him enough time. But of course, she has all the time she needs when she draws. And that seems to be part of the ritual and acknowledging at this stage, in any case, that this emphasis we've seen on that family unit all the way up to that point crumbles. Because once they've decided, once the family has been decided upon, and one member of that family is going to die, then they all become individuals. It's an interesting observation. I kind of like that. Until they finish picking, because then whoever's got the black dot, okay, they're going to die. They're obviously no longer part of the family. But the survivors then can come back as a family unit and go back to that hierarchy. But for that one moment, yes, they're all individuals, including the children. Great observation. Didn't even think about that. That's great. Yes, because it works well with the emphasis that the story has on the family unit and the control that the males have over the family unit. But when it comes down to this, now they're all individuals to make their final draw. It's great. Anything else?
Hi, sir. Sorry. I just wanted to say that my computer crashed, and so I missed a little snippet of the class.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, there's not much to do. We were just going over it. Hopefully this will record and you'll be able to come back to it.
All
I don't
right.
think you missed anything of great importance. Okay. Yes, Sherwin.
Yes, it isn't fair. It really caught my attention. I was thinking what kind of what is running around in the mind of Mrs.
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson. Is it for like, it's like, was she thinking about any deception about, remember the one who prepares the paper for the draw is our Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves.
Yep.
So I don't know what you're talking about, that it isn't fair, or
Well,
about tradition itself.
I don't think she, I mean, again, when she comes out and it seems very feeble, saying, well, it's not fair, that only comes out after the draw. I mean, it is fair. Everyone's in the same situation. So it just seems to be, and this is what I was trying to get at before in terms of why is she bringing this up now, it seems to be that her rebellion, her recognition, or suggestion that it's not fair, it's just an attempt at self-preservation. That realization, remember, she's the one who comes in, you know, I forgot what day it was. Right, so it's really not that important to her until all of a sudden she's the one, or potentially the one. And then it just seems like an act of desperation to try and, kill someone else. I don't want to be, how about, can I get my daughter? My daughter, she can choose with us, right? That'll increase my chances of survival. So I don't think she comes across that good. And I don't think that anyone is taking her seriously and thinking it's not fair, because there's no evidence to suggest that it wasn't fair. Everything went according to plan. Everyone drew the same way. So it just seems like an act of desperation, which of course is interesting insofar as that if anyone is eventually going to stop this horrific tradition and ritual, if it starts with someone claiming that it's not fair out of desperation, maybe, and it comes back to what we were discussing earlier, maybe they'll start asking questions. And that's what's so frustrating here. And that's what's a big part of the commentary is. Why aren't you asking why we're doing this? Why are they doing this? Oh, we're going to take the old man's word for it because if we don't do this, we're going to end up living back in caves? That's preposterous. And it never tells us. And again, that's, I think, the commentary the story is making, that we do a lot of rituals and have a lot of traditions that we don't know why we do it, and that we should question it. And maybe say, you know what, these traditions are kind of silly. And maybe they resonated 500 years ago when the world was a very different place and the ideas were very different and didn't have the science to explain so much phenomena around us. But come on, why are we still doing this? It's no more specific than that. But it's certainly that's what the story's asking us and challenging us to think about. and obviously exaggerating for effect by having that kind of ending. Anything else? Okay. All right, what I want to do is bring up the Essay Essentials document and we'll look over it. Again, this could be repetitive for some, but obviously for others, it's something that I think we should go over in preparation for the exam. Okay. So, the basics, and you all have access to this. And certainly the best way to prepare for the exam is reread the stories and go over this. Rereading the stories will get you prepared in terms of content. Looking at this means you will not lose marks, basic marks in any case, for structure. And then it's just the writing, right? So 5-paragraph, it's your basic essay structure, intro, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. You'll see when we study Shakespeare, starting in 2 weeks, all his plays are 5 acts. Similar thinking behind it too, which I'll be discussing when we start looking at Shakespeare. Again, there's a lot of details here. I'm going to draw your attention to what's most important. Okay? So, in your introduction, this is what's most important. All right? And hold on, I'm going to talk about the thesis statement after I go over the structure with you, okay? Because it's on the next page. You know, an attention statement, ideally, because you're thinking of an audience, you want to get their attention right off the bat. One of the things you have to keep in mind in your introduction, your thesis statement should come at the end. So what do you put up here? Yes, you can have an attention statement, something to get your attention, but it has to be relevant. Okay. But overall, what is going here before your thesis statement? Okay. What I'm getting at is this writing you do in 2/3 of your introduction creates a context for the thesis statement. What you put here should make it, should give information that then would allow for a relatively short thesis statement to be fully understood. In other words, without this, your thesis statement might not work. You're giving background information that will lend itself to a clearer understanding. Go back to my example I was using before. The black box is a representative of the diminishment of tradition in Western society. You'd be up here saying, you know, in the lottery is talking about the importance and the maintenance of ritual and tradition. The story is conveying how impactful, at times overwhelming, the adherence to tradition can be for a close-knit, compact community. You've created a context now, specifically related to the text, that would allow for an easy segue, transition, if you will, though it's not really a transition, because it's still part of the same unit, to say the depiction of the black box as fading and stained exemplifies how those traditions are in fact fading in the story, and yet are still held on to tight enough to devastate the community. And this is seen when we have a detailed description of the box, the overall means by which the story conveys this tight-knit community. That brings you back to what you were saying in the context, and in the brutality of how the tradition and ritual is ended. And what you've done there, if you do something like that, is you take your position that it is a reflection of the demise, and you've also included in there the 3 areas that you're going to talk about. The community, right? The depiction of the close-knit community, the horror of the end, and I forget exactly what I said, but the actual way in which the box looks and how it's treated on every day but the 27th. What that would allow you to do, if you can include those 3 points here, those are going to be the 3 things you're going to talk about, focus on in these body paragraphs. So you'd have your first paragraph that would obviously be sure it relates to the position you're taking. The box is a symbol of the fading of tradition in Western society. And in this first paragraph, you're going to talk about how the box looks, how the box is kept in a grocery store, or sometimes in a hardware store. They don't even really seem to know where the box is other than on the 27th. You're going to talk about, what was the second thing I said? Well, the third one, because you'd probably want to build to that, the horror of the ending. Oh, and here you'd be talking about the community. All relating back to your thesis statement. And each one of these as a whole, each of these 3 paragraphs will directly tie into the thesis statement. And each one of these paragraphs will have a topic sentence. And everything inside of the paragraph will have a direct correlation to that topic sentence. It's in that topic sentence that you talk about the appearance of the box and where it's stored. Topic sentence here would have to have the word community in it. And the topic sentence here would have to have a reference to the stoning or the end of the story. Inside of each one of these, other than your topic sentence, is your supporting details, reason, or example. So you're going to want to, you have the book with you. You can paraphrase, but it might be helpful to throw in a direct quote, 1 or 2 at most per paragraph. Short. This is seen when it's revealed that the casualness in which the box is treated on every day other than the day of the lottery. And then you could have a quote where it's talking about it's stored at the grocery store. Something along those lines. Okay. The reason, remember, you have to go elaborate a bit. This seems to suggest, the story is suggesting that it is not considered to be of any value or worth other than on that single day of the 27th. Which is demonstrating that the ritual is not something that impacts this community year long. Well, everything I've just done, you've got your first paragraph. Then you do the same thing for the others. Community. What do you want to say about the community in terms of how it ties in to the box as a symbol of the tradition? And this is where you could certainly bring in about how this community is very rigorous in its patriarchal hierarchy with men dominating, and how this is a tradition in itself. Relate it back again to the black box, that as is the case with the black box, this old-fashioned concept of a woman's role should be faded as well. There is something you could find, I'm just remembering now in this short story where he talks when we're first introduced to the women. And what are they wearing? Faded dresses. Be great to bring that in to talk about how, you know, this community is related to the box because of this use of the term faded for their dresses as it is faded for the box. And then you do the same thing here when you're talking about the end and the brutality of it and how, again, I'm just kind of winging it here, that brutality can be related in a roundabout way to the battered box, the battering of the victim, the indifference of the community to the brutality of the murder, which they will all forget by the 28th, if not sooner, which then ties into the way that the box has been stored haphazardly. No one's thinking about it after that day. Okay? And everything I just did now, if there was a question on the lottery of that nature, everything I just did now is basically what you should be doing in the first 10 minutes of the exam, is writing this down. I was just doing that off the fly, off the top of my head. Well, that's how everything starts. And I obviously can't write properly like this, but I'd be writing all those ideas down. I got my 3 main ideas, right? The way the black box looks and how they treat the black box when it's not the 27th. The community, yes, the community. That is a reflection of the tradition and how that is fading as well, maybe, perhaps. And yes, and how it builds up to this horror and how the black box. Oh yes, I got to remember. It's the black box. I'm writing about the black box. I'm taking a position vis-a-vis the black box. So I've got to tie this all into the black box. That's how you want to be thinking. Yes, you are allowed your books in the exam. And you're allowed a dictionary in the exam. You're allowed to bring your notes to the exam. I have no problem with that. Okay? Keep in mind, again, this exam does not lend itself to any kind of cheating. You've got to think before you write. You've got to write and communicate it. And as I said, chances are either your cameras are going to be on your faces or it's going to be on, you're going to be sharing your screen. Right? But be careful. The book, what I would suggest when you're preparing and you're doing your rereading, look for passages that you think are really going to be useful in almost any way that you can address that story. That way you're not looking and looking, and highlight it or put a little sticker in it so that, when the old man is saying that we're all going to go back, I need that quote. You'll know it's right there. Otherwise you lose time trying to find it. It's the only reason I hesitate from making it an open book is I don't want you losing time for that, but at the same time, it's really important to get in the habit of using direct quotes to substantiate your claims with concrete evidence. Okay, as we're getting wrap up here. Don't worry so much about the conclusion. The only thing I'm going to remind you about the conclusion is don't just say exactly what you said in the introduction. You do revisit your thesis statement. You do restate a few things, but there's a big difference. Your audience, me, when I read your introduction, I haven't read any of this. When I get to the end, I'm enlightened. I have been informed. I have learned things. You want to restate it now to an audience that has seen your argument. So it's really about phrasing in the conclusion. It's also where you have the most freedom in your conclusion to get somewhat opinionated. careful with the opinions, though. The other thing that I should, and I see how much I have to emphasize it in the second half of the semester after your midterm. Be very wary of using I. There is no reason to say, I think this and I think that. Obviously, it's what you think. It's your essay. And the danger with the I is then you start potentially falling into a trap of talking about yourself. When I teach composition at the university, I forbid the use of the word I. I take marks off if I see the I. When everyone comes out of high school, you know, writing essays, what did you do over the summer? I did this, I did that. This is not that kind of an essay. This is an academic essay. The danger of using the I is it becomes about you. And with all due respect, when I look at these essays, I don't care about you. I care about your argument. And if you distract me or lead me away from the argument by talking about personal things, you have left the realm of academic integrity. I'm not forbidding you from using the I, but I am cautioning you. And if there is an issue with it, I have some great exercises we'll be doing after the exam on how to get rid of the I. Okay. Okay, so for the topic sentence, we have a question just to be a little clearer with the topic sentence. The topic sentence works for the paragraph in the same way that the thesis statement works for the entire essay. You have a topic sentence that clearly states what this paragraph is about. And it's important if for a variety of reasons, not the least of which, it will allow you to make sure that you are staying on topic. Each paragraph should be dealing with a singular idea. If you have the topic sentence, you can check and make sure everything you're writing here can be related to that singular idea. If it's not, then it should probably have a paragraph of its own or should be omitted completely. Everything has to relate to that topic. Before you start writing, write out your topic sentence for all three of these before you start writing the paragraphs would be my suggestion. Okay. And then of course you have to be sure that each one of these topic sentences ties into your thesis statement. Okay, it's those of you who are mathematically inclined or scientifically inclined, think of it in those terms. They have to connect. They have to connect. This is what gives your essay cohesion. And it's not drifting. You can't try to cram in too much material. Decide on your main ideas and stick with them. You go, oh my God, but I have there's like 10 main ideas I want to talk about. You got to reduce it to 3. You got to decide which the 3 most important. And that's what you do in the pre-writing stage. Even in an exam, you take those first 15, 20 minutes. Gather your thoughts before you start writing. If you just start writing right away, I've seen this 1,000 times, your beginning of your essay is going to be all over the place. And remember, the beginning is what your audience sees first. It makes an impression and influences the way your audience is going to continue to read. Okay? This is, again, basically repeating, just written out what I've just said. Okay, there's a little more about your concluding paragraph, but again, don't get bogged down in that. I'm mainly concerned about your introduction and the 3 body paragraphs. do your best with the conclusions, but I will emphasize it more in the final.
The transition, does it connect one to the other? Is that
Oh,
it?
yeah. I don't want to, again, because I'm giving you a lot here. Transitioning in its most basic form, right, is does this flow, this paragraph, the first body paragraph flow into the second one? And does this one flow into here? And the way you do that, there's a variety of ways. I don't want you to get bogged down in this. Something that, again, we can work on in the second half. But it's usually finding the right phrasing. This issue regarding how the black box symbolizes the tradition is further recognized in the family units. That's how you could end this one, which transitions because it's mentioning the family units, which is what you're going to talk to here. And then at the end of this one, and continued examples of the box as a symbol for the tradition and so on can be found in the power of the ending. And that would transition you to your paragraph dealing with the ending. That's what I mean by transitions. They're tricky though. All right, it really comes more when you're more familiar with your writing style. If it comes naturally to you, but the examples I gave you are a good way of thinking about it. You're setting up the next paragraph, so it's not an abrupt jump from one paragraph to the other. Okay, but I will talk more about transitions after I see your midterms and see how they go. And if there's a need, we will talk more about transitions because it really, especially for your later English classes, transitions can really make a difference in terms of how your teachers will mark it because it flows. And the last thing that you want your audience to do is to have some abrupt shifts. Again, briefly, I know we're out of time, but bear with me and I'll wrap this up. And of course, anyone, if you want to meet with me before the exam, contact me, we'll set up an appointment. This thesis statement is one, if not the most important part of your essay. And again, go quickly, a successful thesis makes an argument. Doesn't mean it's combative, it means it's something that can be disputed. The black box represents the demise and the fading away of traditional values in Western civilization. I disagree. That's how you test if it is argumentative. Can someone disagree with you? You may say, well, technically they can disagree with me, but if they disagree with me, they're wrong. That's fine. But what it can't be is a statement of fact. The lottery is about a small community of 300 people who on the 27th of, what is it? 27th of whatever the month is, has a lottery. That's not an argument. That's not an argumentative statement. That's a statement of fact. A thesis statement is not a statement of fact. Remember that's how you test it. Can someone argue it? Takes a position that requires defending. Now you have to prove that you're right. You need to make a claim that requires, this is important, that requires supporting evidence. Right? You're going to say, make that claim. I'm going to go, okay, prove it. Because I'm not going to take it at face value. Now you have to go and prove it. Another way to test it. Again, it is a claim, not a fact, that can be supported by reasons or reason. Directly answers the question of the assignment. You'll see when I give you the prompt. That shouldn't be an issue. I'm going to try to make it as clear-cut as possible. It is a statement that unifies the paper by stating the writer's most important or significant points regarding the topic. Okay, this just gets a little long-winded. It's usually one or two, not more. 1 or 2 sentences long. When I teach this at Concordia, it's 1 sentence. I insist on my students getting it into 1 sentence. It can be 2, because remember, you also want to try to incorporate the 3 main ideas. It is a representation of the fading away of traditional values in Western civilization because of the way it's described and stored on days other than the 27th, because of the way that it reflects the community and the communal structure, and because of what the significance of the ending is in relation to that symbol of the box. There you have everything incorporated. It is placed at the end of the introduction, again, so that the beginning of the introduction lays a context. And finally, what it is not an announcement. The thesis is not introduced by opinion phrases, I think, I feel, I believe. Please, and of all these, please, if you do drift into using the I, please, don't tell me how you feel. I don't deal in feelings when it comes to academic essays. Doesn't matter what you feel. It matters what you can prove. Please, and again, try to avoid all the I's. Like same thing with I think. I think is at least a better than I feel. It's a statement. Thesis is not a statement of fact. It is not a question, and it's not a quote. And this is, you use this as your checklist. You can bring this document into the exam with you. You got your little checklist. Does my thesis make an argument? Does my thesis take a position that requires defending? Is it specific? Please be specific and concise. Be specific. No generalizations. The specificity comes from going to the text itself. Don't generalize. Be specific. Is it focused and precise? Such vital questions. And does my thesis answer the question, the big so what? It's a little trickier that. I'll talk more about that in the second half after I see your midterms. But yeah, always ask yourself, so what? You want to be able to say, I'll tell you, so what? That's what, because it's talking about issues that matter, that can transform the world, or at least the individual, potentially. Okay? I know I've run over a little bit today. I've got a class in 7 minutes I got to get to. If you're having any concerns, get in touch with me. I will give you more details in preparation before the exam date, reminding you of what the procedures will be regarding cameras on, whether we're going to share screens, and so on. Look at this document, reread the stories. You should be fine. Okay? You good?
Yes.
Oh, I heard the little baby there too. That's it. I think that was I hope that was a baby I heard. Okay. Get in touch with me if you have any questions. I will see you next week, and as I said, I'll go over the question with you, and we'll start the timing at like 12:45. You'll have 3 full hours. Okay?
Sir, can I talk to you 2 minutes only?
Yep, no problem. All right, everyone. So
Sir.
that's it. And if you need to say a word or two to me, I'll stay on. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.